Chicago, 1994. The winter air cut through the alley like a blade, carrying the smell of garbage and desperation. Two children huddled behind a dumpster, their breath forming small clouds that disappeared into the freezing night. The boy was 12, thin as a rail, with eyes too old for his face. The girl was 10, her tangled hair falling over a face marked by hunger and fear. His name was Marcus. Hers was Eleanor. They had found each other the way strays always do, drawn together by the invisible gravity of loneliness. He had been living on these streets for 2 years since his mother passed, and his father disappeared into a bottle. She had run away from a foster home where the walls held too many secrets and the silence screamed too loud. Marcus pulled his torn jacket tighter around Eleanor's shoulders. She was shivering, her lips turning blue. They had not eaten in 3 days. The shelter was full. The churches had closed their doors hours ago. All they had was each other, and the stubborn refusal to let the city swallow them whole. "I'm scared," Elena whispered. Her voice was so small it almost got lost in the wind. Marcus looked at her. In the dim light filtering from a distant street lamp, he could see the tears she was trying to hold back. Something shifted inside his chest, a feeling he could not name, a weight that settled on his shoulders like a mantle he had not asked for, but would carry anyway. "Don't be," he said. His voice cracked, still caught between childhood and something harder. "I'm going to protect you. Someday I'm going to be somebody, and when I am, nobody will ever hurt you again. I promise." Eleanor looked up at him. In that moment, despite everything, the cold, the hunger, the fear, she believed him. Not because his words made sense, not because she understood how a homeless boy could ever become someone powerful enough to keep such a promise. She believed him because of the way he said it, with absolute certainty, as if the future was already written and he was simply reading it aloud. "You promise?" she asked. "I swear it," Marcus said, "on my mother's memory, on everything I am and everything I'll become. Someday, Eleanor, someday I'll come back for you." That night, as they fell asleep, pressed against each other for warmth, neither of them knew that fate was already setting its pieces on the board. They did not know that in just a few hours their paths would be torn apart. They did not know that it would take 20 years for that promise to find its way home. But the universe has a long memory, and some vows are written in a language that time itself cannot erase. The next morning came with sirens and shouting. Social workers had received a tip about children living in the alleys near the industrial district. Marcus woke to the sound of heavy boots splashing through puddles. He grabbed Elena's hand, pulling her up, but they were too slow, too tired, too weak from days without food. They were separated on that street corner. Elena was loaded into one van, Marcus into another. She pressed her hand against the window as the vehicle pulled away, her eyes finding his across the growing distance. He mouthed the words again. The promise. She could not hear him, but she read his lips. Someday. Elena was placed with a family in Indiana, a quiet couple who could not have children of their own. They were kind in their own distant way, providing food and shelter and education, but never quite warmth. She grew up in the shadow of that winter morning, carrying Marcus's promise like a locket against her heart. She looked for him in every crowd, listened for his voice in every city she passed through. But the years stretched on, and hope is a difficult thing to sustain when the world keeps proving it wrong. She became a nurse. It seemed fitting. The girl who had once needed saving found purpose in saving others. She moved back to Chicago at 25, driven by something she could not fully explain. A pull. A need to be close to the place where her story had begun. She worked double shifts at a public hospital on the South Side, treating gunshot wounds and overdoses and the countless small tragedies that poverty produces. She lived alone in a small apartment. She dated occasionally, but never seriously. Some part of her was still waiting, still listening for footsteps that might belong to a boy who had once sworn to return. Marcus's path was different, darker, more complicated. The foster system chewed him up and spit him out by 16. He had a temper that got him into trouble, and a mind that should have gotten him out. He was smart, brilliantly so, but nobody in the system cared about the intelligence of angry boys with no connections and no future. He fell in with a crew that ran numbers and protection in the Bridgeport neighborhood, small-time stuff at first, enough to survive. But Marcus had something the other boys did not: vision. He could see patterns where others saw chaos. He could anticipate moves 3 steps ahead. By 18, he was running his own operations. By 21, he had caught the attention of Vincent Morello, one of the most powerful men in Chicago's underground economy. Vincent was old school. He had built his empire on construction contracts, waste management and strategic investments in legitimate businesses that served as fronts for less legitimate activities. He had no sons. His daughter had married a banker and moved to New York, wanting nothing to do with her father's world. He needed someone to groom, someone with intelligence and hunger and the willingness to make hard choices. He chose Marcus. The next decade was an education. Marcus learned how to move money through shells and trusts. He learned how to negotiate with city officials and union bosses. He learned how to inspire loyalty and, when necessary, how to inspire fear. He learned that power was not about cruelty. It was about control, about being the one who set the terms while everyone else played by them. When Vincent died of a heart attack at 73, Marcus was 30. The transition was seamless. The boy from the alley had become the man who owned the city. Not officially, of course. On paper, he was a successful real estate developer and investor. He sat on the boards of 3 charities. He had been photographed shaking hands with mayors and congressmen. But everyone who mattered knew the truth. Marcus Wright was the boss, and Chicago was his. Through all of it, through every deal and every decision and every long night building his kingdom, Marcus never forgot. The promise lived inside him like a second heartbeat. He had hired investigators over the years trying to track Elena down, but the foster system's records were incomplete, and she had moved so many times and the trail always went cold. He began to wonder if she was even still alive, if she had made it out, if she remembered him at all. Then, on a rainy Tuesday in October, 20 years after that frozen morning, fate decided to stop playing games. Marcus was leaving a meeting at a restaurant in Lincoln Park when his driver took a wrong turn to avoid construction. The detour took them past Chicago General Hospital. Marcus glanced out the window without much interest and then told the driver to stop. A woman was standing at the bus stop in front of the hospital. She was wearing scrubs, her hair pulled back in a practical ponytail, her face tired but still beautiful. She was checking her phone, completely unaware that she was being watched by the most powerful man in the city. Marcus's heart stopped, then started again, pounding so hard he could feel it in his throat. He knew that face. He had carried it with him for 2 decades. He had seen it in dreams and memories and in the face of every woman he had ever been unable to love because none of them were her. Elena. He had found her. Or maybe, after all this time, she had found him. Marcus did not approach her that night. He could not. What was he supposed to say? Hi, remember me? I'm that homeless kid who promised to protect you, and now I run half the criminal operations in Chicago? He needed time. He needed to think. He needed to figure out how to re-enter her life without destroying everything. So he watched. He learned. He assigned people to gather information, but from a distance, nothing intrusive. He discovered that she worked 60-hour weeks, that she volunteered at a free clinic on weekends, that she lived alone and seemed to have no close friends or family, that she was struggling financially despite her grueling schedule, sending money to a foster sister who had gotten into trouble. He learned that she was good, genuinely good, the kind of person who had every reason to become hard and bitter, but had chosen compassion instead, the kind of person he had spent his whole life trying to become worthy of, and he learned that she was in danger. Elena's hospital was in debt. The parent corporation that owned it was planning to sell the building to a development company, Marcus's development company as it happened, though she did not know that. And when the deal closed, hundreds of healthcare workers would lose their jobs and thousands of patients would lose access to care. But that was not the worst of it. One of Elena's patients was a young man named Darnell Washington. He had come into the emergency room with injuries he claimed were from a car accident, but Elena recognized the marks for what they were. Someone had hurt him badly, deliberately, professionally. Darnell was terrified, and when Elena pressed gently, he finally told her the truth. He had witnessed something he should not have seen, a meeting between a city councilman and a man named Raymond Cross. Money had changed hands, a lot of money, and Darnell had been spotted. Raymond Cross was a problem. He was a mid-level operator who had carved out a territory on the west side, through brutality and intimidation. He was not connected to Marcus's organization. In fact, he had been a thorn in Marcus's side for years, too reckless and violent to be useful, too connected to certain politicians to eliminate easily. Now he was looking for Darnell, and anyone who had helped Darnell, which meant he was looking for Elena. Marcus learned all of this within 72 hours. He learned that Raymond had already sent men to the hospital asking questions. He learned that Elena had noticed the strangers in the waiting room and had started varying her route home. He learned that she was scared but refused to abandon her patient. The same Elena. After all these years, still brave, still stubborn, still willing to put herself in harm's way to protect someone who needed her. Marcus made his decision. He had spent 20 years building power. Now he knew exactly what he was going to use it for. The rain had not stopped for 3 days. Elena stood at the window of her apartment, watching the water stream down the glass, and tried to convince herself that everything was fine, that the men in the waiting room were just concerned relatives, that the black SUV she had seen parked outside her building was a coincidence, that the feeling of being watched was just paranoia born from too many night shifts and not enough sleep. She was failing. Her phone buzzed, a text from an unknown number. "You need to leave your apartment. Now. There is a car waiting for you downstairs. Black. Sedan. The driver's name is Thomas. He will take you somewhere safe. Please trust me, I will explain everything soon." Eleanor stared at the message. Her first instinct was to delete it and call the police. But something stopped her. Something about the phrasing. Please trust me. Not a demand. A request. Almost gentle. Against every rational instinct, she walked to her window and looked down at the street. There was indeed a black sedan parked at the curb, and there was the SUV she had noticed, before parked half a block away. As she watched, 2 men got out of the SUV and began walking toward her building's entrance. Her blood went cold. She did not have time to think. She grabbed her bag, shoved her phone and wallet inside, and ran for the stairs. 6 floors. Her legs were burning by the time she reached the lobby. She could hear heavy footsteps somewhere above her, descending fast. The sedan's back door opened as she burst out of the building. She threw herself inside. The driver, Thomas she presumed, pulled away from the curb before she had even closed the door. "Who are you?" Elena demanded, her voice shaking. "Who sent you?" Thomas was an older man with grey at his temples and the calm demeanor of someone who had seen everything and been surprised by nothing. "Someone who has been looking for you for a very long time," he said. "He'll explain when we arrive." Arrive where? But Thomas just drove, and Elena was too exhausted and frightened to press. She leaned back against the leather seat and tried to slow her breathing. The city streamed past the windows, familiar streets becoming unfamiliar as they moved into neighborhoods she had never visited. The buildings grew larger, more elegant. Old money. The kind of neighborhood where people had security systems and private guards and never had to worry about men in SUVs following them home. The car turned into a gated driveway. Eleanor caught a glimpse of a house, no, a mansion, rising from manicured grounds. Like something out of a movie. Stone facades, tall windows glowing with warm light. The kind of place that existed in a different world from the one she knew. Thomas opened her door. "He's waiting for you in the study," he said. "Second door on the left." Eleanor walked through the front entrance in a daze. The interior was exactly what she would have expected. High ceilings, polished floors, art on the walls that probably cost more than she made in a year. But it was also warmer than she had anticipated, lived in. There were books stacked on tables and a sweater draped over a chair and the faint smell of coffee in the air. She found the study door and knocked. A voice from inside told her to enter. The man standing by the fireplace was tall, broad-shouldered, wearing a simple grey sweater and dark pants. His hair was cut short, touched with grey at the temples. His face was strong-featured, marked by time, but still handsome. But it was his eyes that made Elena stop breathing. She knew those eyes. She had looked into them 1,000 times in her memory. She had seen them in her dreams for 20 years. "Marcus," she whispered. He smiled. And suddenly, he was not a powerful stranger in a mansion. He was a boy of 12, shivering in an alley, pulling his jacket around her shoulders and making promises that should have been impossible. "Hello, Elena," he said. "I told you I'd come back." She did not remember crossing the room. One moment she was frozen by the door. The next, she was in his arms, crying so hard she could barely breathe. He held her. His arms were strong and steady, so different from the thin limbs she remembered, but the way he held her was exactly the same, like she was the most precious thing in the world, like he would never let anything hurt her. "How?" she managed to ask when she could finally speak. "How is this possible?" Marcus guided her to a sofa by the fire. He poured her a glass of water and sat beside her, close but not quite touching, giving her space while staying near. "I've been looking for you for years," he said. "I hired investigators, searched records, followed every lead. But you kept moving, and the foster system records were a mess, and—" He shook his head. "I started to think I'd never find you, that maybe you didn't want to be found, that you'd forgotten." "I never forgot," Eleanor said fiercely. "Not for one day, not for 1 minute." Something shifted in his expression, a wall coming down. "Neither did I." They talked for hours. Elena learned about his journey, a carefully edited version, she suspected, but honest in the ways that mattered. He told her about Vincent and the business empire and the legitimate side of his operations, the real estate and construction and charitable foundations. He did not pretend to be a saint. He admitted that the path he had walked was not always clean. But he also made her understand that he had spent 2 decades building something powerful, specifically so he could keep the promise he had made to a scared little girl in an alley. "And now you're in trouble," he said finally. "Raymond Cross. I know what happened at the hospital. I know he's looking for you." Elena's fear came flooding back. "How do you know about that?" "Because I know everything that happens in this city." He said it without arrogance, just fact. "Cross is dangerous, but he's also careless. He's made enemies. The councilman he's working with is facing a federal investigation. The whole operation is going to collapse within months. But right now, tonight, you're not safe. I need you to stay here until I can resolve this." "Stay here?" Eleanor looked around at the opulent room. "Marcus, I have a job. I have patients. I can't just—" "I'll take care of the hospital." He held up a hand to stop her protest. "I was already planning to restructure the acquisition. Keep the facility open, protect the jobs, expand services to the community. I was going to do it anyway, because it's the right thing to do, but now I have another reason." Elena stared at him. "You own the company that's buying the hospital." "I own a lot of things, Elena." He met her eyes. "And I would give up all of it to keep you safe." The words hung in the air between them. 20 years of separation, 20 years of parallel lives, intersecting now in this moment, in this room, in the warmth of a fire that crackled against the rain still falling outside. "I don't know what to say," Eleanor whispered. "You don't have to say anything." Marcus reached out slowly and took her hand. His touch was gentle, asking, not demanding. "Just let me do what I promised. Let me protect you." She should have argued, should have insisted on her independence, her capability, her right to handle her own problems. But she was so tired, and his hand was warm. And somewhere deep inside her, in the place where a terrified 10-year-old still lived, she heard the echo of words spoken 2 decades ago. "Someday, Elena, someday I'll come back for you." "Okay," she said. "I'll stay." The first week was strange. Elena had been given a suite of rooms on the mansion's 2nd floor, bedroom, sitting room, private bathroom, all of it larger and more luxurious than her entire apartment. Thomas brought her meals when she did not feel like coming downstairs. Marcus checked on her every evening, sharing coffee by the fire and telling her stories about his life, learning about hers. She discovered that he was not what she had expected. Yes, he was powerful. Yes, there was a hardness to him that spoke of difficult choices and moral compromises. But there was also kindness. He remembered that she used to love hot chocolate with extra marshmallows, and she found a cup waiting for her every morning. He noticed that she was struggling to sleep and hired a massage therapist to help her relax. He saw her reading a medical journal on infectious diseases and donated $1 million to the research foundation it was published by. "You don't have to do that," she told him when she found out. "I know," he said. "I wanted to." "Why?" He looked at her for a long moment. "Because I spent 20 years building power and wondering what the point of it was. Now I know. The point is this. The point is you." Eleanor did not know how to respond to that, so she changed the subject, asking about the situation with Raymond Cross. Marcus's expression darkened. "He's being dealt with." "What does that mean?" "It means that in a few weeks he and the councilman will both be facing serious legal problems. The evidence has already been gathered. The right people have been informed. Justice will be served." He paused. "The legal kind of justice. I want you to know that. I don't operate the way Cross does. I don't hurt people unless there's no other option." "And is there another option here?" "There always is, if you're smart enough to find it." He smiled slightly. "I'm very smart, Elena." She believed him. The days turned into weeks. Elena began to settle into a routine. She could not go back to the hospital yet, not until Cross was neutralized, but she found other ways to occupy herself. Marcus had a library that rivaled some universities, and she spent hours there reading. She helped with the planning for the hospital restructuring, offering insights about what the staff and community actually needed. She even started cooking dinner sometimes, insisting that Marcus's chef take the night off so she could make the kind of simple, hearty meals she remembered from childhood. Marcus noticed everything: the books she liked, the music she listened to, the way she took her coffee. He adjusted the house to accommodate her preferences without ever being asked, until she started to feel less like a guest and more like someone who belonged there. They did not talk about the past very often. It was too painful, too full of sharp edges that could cut if handled carelessly. But sometimes, late at night, when the fire had burned low and the house was quiet, they would share memories. The time they had found a whole pizza in a dumpster and felt like royalty. The night she had been sick and he had stayed awake for 18 hours, making sure she kept breathing. The morning they had been separated, the last look they had shared through rain-streaked glass. "I never stopped looking for you," Marcus said one night, "even when I thought I should give up. Even when people told me you were probably dead or gone forever. Something kept me going. The promise, I guess. I couldn't break it. I couldn't let you down." "You didn't," Elena said softly. "You're here now. That's all that matters." He reached for her hand again. This time, when their fingers intertwined, it did not feel like comfort. It felt like something else, something deeper, something that had been waiting to bloom for 20 years. Elena was falling in love with him. She had probably been in love with him since she was 10 years old, but now that love was taking a different shape. Adult, complex, terrifying and exhilarating in equal measure. She could see that he felt the same way. It was in his eyes when he looked at her, in the way his voice softened when he said her name, in the careful distance he maintained even as everything in his body language screamed that he wanted to be closer. He was waiting for her, giving her time to adjust, making sure she never felt pressured or obligated. She had never met a man like him. She suspected there were no other men like him. The call came on a Thursday morning. Marcus was in his study when his phone rang. Eleanor was in the library next door, close enough to hear the shift in his voice when he answered, close enough to hear the silence that followed. She went to the doorway. He was standing at the window, his back to her, every line of his body taut with tension. "When?" he said into the phone. And then, "I understand. I'll handle it." He ended the call and stood there for a long moment, not moving. When he finally turned around, his face was carved from stone. "What happened?" Eleanor asked. "Raymond Cross." The name came out flat, hard. "He found out where you are. He's planning to move against the house." Fear shot through her like ice water. "How is that possible? You said—" "I know what I said." Marcus crossed to his desk and began pulling out files, documents, spreading them across the surface like he was preparing for battle. "Someone talked. Someone in my organization who shouldn't have. I'll deal with them later. Right now we need to focus on keeping you safe. What are we going to do?" He looked up at her. In that moment she saw the boy from the alley, fierce, protective, absolutely certain of what he was fighting for. "I'm going to end this," he said. "Tonight." The next few hours were chaos. People came and went from the mansion, serious men and women speaking in low voices and carrying equipment Eleanor did not want to look at too closely. Thomas moved her to a secure room in the basement, comfortable but reinforced, impossible to breach from outside. Marcus came to see her before he left. He was wearing different clothes now, dark, practical, designed for movement. He looked like a different person, harder, more dangerous. But when he knelt beside her chair and took her hands, his eyes were still the same. "I need you to trust me," he said. "I need you to stay here, and wait, and believe that I'm going to come back. Marcus, I know you're scared. I know this isn't what you imagined when I promised to protect you, but this is who I am, Elena. This is the world I built, and the only way to keep you safe is to step into that world and use all the power I've accumulated to destroy the threat against you." "I'm not scared for me," Elena said, her voice breaking. "I'm scared for you. What if something happens? What if—" He leaned forward and kissed her forehead. It was gentle, reverent, a benediction, more than a kiss. "Nothing is going to happen to me," he said. "I've survived too much to die now, not when I just found you again." She wanted to argue. She wanted to beg him to stay, to call the police, to find some other way. But she looked into his eyes and saw the truth. There was no other way. This was his world. These were his rules. And if she wanted to be part of his life, she had to accept all of it. "Come back to me," she whispered. "Always," he said. "I promise." And then he was gone. Check if you're already subscribed to this channel. If this story has made you feel something real, if you want to see what happens next, subscribe now. This is just the beginning. The hours that followed were the longest of Elena's life. She sat in the secure room with Thomas, who had stayed behind to guard her, and tried not to imagine all the things that could go wrong. She thought about Marcus at 12, promising to protect her. She thought about the look in his eyes when he left. She thought about what it would mean to lose him now after finally finding him again. She prayed. She had not prayed in years, not since she was a child in that cold alley, but now the words came back to her like muscle memory. "Please keep him safe. Please bring him back. Please let this story have a happy ending." The call came at 3:47 a.m. Thomas answered, listened, then turned to Elena with a smile. "It's done," he said. "He's coming home." She barely remembered running up the stairs, barely remembered throwing open the front door and standing on the threshold as headlights appeared at the end of the driveway, barely remembered anything except Marcus climbing out of the car, tired and disheveled, but alive, so wonderfully alive. She threw herself into his arms and held on like she would never let go. "What happened?" she asked when she could finally speak. Marcus guided her inside, keeping one arm around her as they walked. "Raymond Cross is going to prison. The councilman, too. There was enough evidence to bring them down without anything messy. The federal investigation accelerated when they received some additional documentation, anonymous donation to the cause. You did that. I told you. The point of power is what you do with it." He stopped in the hallway and turned to face her fully. "It's over, Elena. You're safe. Darnell is safe. The hospital is staying open. Everything is going to be okay." She stared at him, trying to process. After weeks of Fear and uncertainty, the idea that it could simply be over seemed impossible. Just like that? Just like that. He smiled, and the hardness melted away, leaving only the man she was beginning to know. Well, there was a lot of planning and coordination and calling in favors accumulated over 2 decades. But yes, just like that. Eleanor started laughing. She could not help it. The relief was too immense, the absurdity of her life too overwhelming. 2 months ago, she had been a tired nurse, living in a tiny apartment, and now she was standing in a mansion with a man who had moved heaven and earth to keep a promise made 20 years ago. Marcus laughed too. It was a sound she had never heard before, open, unguarded, young. It made him look like the boy she remembered. "I love you," she said. The laughter stopped. His eyes widened slightly, then softened into something so tender it made her chest ache. "Say that again." "I love you," Elena repeated. "I think I've loved you my whole life. I think I was always waiting for you to come back." He kissed her then. A real kiss, not the gentle press of lips to her forehead, but a kiss that said everything words could not. 20 years of longing, 20 years of hope, 20 years of promises kept and futures finally beginning. When they finally pulled apart, both of them breathless, Marcus rested his forehead against hers. "I love you too," he said. "I have loved you since I was a stupid kid, who didn't know anything except that I would die before I let anything hurt you. I love you more now than I did then, and I will love you more tomorrow than I do today. That's my new promise, the only one I'm ever going to make again." Elena smiled through her tears. "I'll hold you to that. I'm counting on it." The next few months were a study in transformation. Eleanor moved into the mansion officially, turning her suite of rooms into a home. She went back to work at the hospital, which was now thriving under new management. Management that understood the importance of community healthcare, because the boss's girlfriend had very strong opinions about the subject. She met Marcus's world gradually, carefully. The legitimate side first, the board meetings and charity galas and business dinners, where she learned to navigate conversations about real estate development and investment strategies. Then, slowly, the other side, the people who worked for him. The quiet operations that kept the city running in ways most citizens never saw. It was not always easy. There were things she struggled with, moral lines that blurred in uncomfortable ways. But Marcus was patient. He explained his reasoning, listened to her concerns, even changed some of his practices when she made compelling arguments. They were partners in everything, which meant they disagreed sometimes. But they disagreed honestly, openly, and they always found a way forward together. The boy from the alley had become a man she was proud to stand beside. One evening, about 6 months after the night everything changed, Marcus took Elena to a restaurant in the city. A small place, Italian, tucked away on a side street. The kind of place where the owner knew everyone's name and the pasta was made fresh every morning. They had just finished dessert when Marcus reached across the table and took her hand. "I need to ask you something," he said. Eleanor's heart started to race. What kind of something? The most important something. He reached, into his jacket pocket, and pulled out a small velvet box. When he opened it, a diamond caught the candlelight and scattered it across the table like scattered stars. "Elena," Marcus said, his voice steady but his eyes bright with emotion, "I spent 20 years building an empire because I thought that was the only way to keep my promise to you. But I was wrong. Power isn't what protects you, love is. And I have loved you for so long, through so much, that I can't imagine my life without you in it. Will you marry me?" She was crying again. She seemed to do that a lot around him. "Yes," she said. "Yes, absolutely yes." He slid the ring onto her finger. It fit perfectly, because of course it did. Marcus Wright did not do anything by halves. The restaurant erupted in applause. Apparently the owner had been watching the whole time, because free champagne appeared at their table almost immediately. Elena laughed and cried and kissed her future husband, while strangers cheered. It was ridiculous. It was wonderful. It was everything she had never dared to dream about. Later, after the champagne and the congratulations and the long drive home, they stood together on the balcony of the mansion, looking out at the city lights. Elena's ring sparkled on her finger. Marcus's arm was around her waist. "Do you remember the first night we met?" she asked. "Every detail," he said. "You were so scared. I was so angry. And I thought, this girl doesn't deserve any of this. None of us deserve this. And then you promised to protect me. And then I promised to protect you." He pulled her closer. "I never thought I'd actually be able to keep that promise. I just knew I had to try. Because if I didn't, if I just accepted that the world was dark and cold and there was nothing I could do about it, then what was the point of anything?" Elena leaned into him. "You saved me, you know, that night and every night since. You gave me something to believe in when I had nothing." "You saved me too," Marcus said softly. "You gave me a reason to become someone worth being. Everything I built, everything I am. It's all because a little girl looked at me like I was capable of miracles." They stood there in silence for a long moment, two people who had started with nothing and found their way to everything. "So what happens now?" Elena finally asked. Marcus smiled. "Now we live, together, for as long as we have. And the business, the operations, the empire you built, still there, still running, but maybe," he paused, considering, "maybe it's time to start thinking about legacy, about building something that lasts beyond us. Something good." "Like what?" "Like a foundation that helps kids like we were, kids on the streets with nobody to protect them. We could fund shelters, education programs, job training. We could make sure other children don't have to make impossible promises in alleys because they have nowhere else to turn." Elena's heart swelled. This man, this incredible man. "I love you," she said. "Have I mentioned that lately?" "About an hour ago," Marcus replied, "but feel free to keep reminding me." She kissed him again, there on the balcony, with the whole city spread out beneath them, like a promise waiting to be kept. The wedding was in the spring. They held it in the mansion's garden, under a canopy of white flowers and fairy lights. Elena wore a simple dress, elegant but not ostentatious, because she had never been comfortable with excess, and Marcus wore a suit that cost more than her first car, because he could not help himself. The guest list was an interesting mix: hospital colleagues and board members, business associates and charity directors, people from Marcus's other world, carefully vetted to ensure nothing awkward happened. And in the front row, holding hands and dabbing at their eyes, Elena's foster sister and the couple from Indiana who had raised her. Not family by blood, but family by choice, which was the only kind that really mattered. The ceremony was short and heartfelt. They had written their own vows, and when Marcus spoke his, there was not a dry eye in the garden. "Elena," he said, holding both her hands in his, "I met you when we were children with nothing but each other. I promised you then that I would protect you, and I have spent my entire life trying to live up to those words. But standing here today, I realize that I had it backwards. You don't need me to protect you. You never did. You are the strongest, bravest, most compassionate person I have ever known. What you need, what we both need, is a partner. Someone to walk beside you through the darkness and the light. Someone to catch you when you fall and celebrate with you when you rise. I want to be that person. I will be that person. For today, tomorrow, and every day after that. I love you. I will always love you. And I will spend the rest of my life proving that I was worthy of the faith a scared little girl placed in a homeless boy 25 years ago." Eleanor was crying too hard to speak. She had to take 3 deep breaths before she could get her own vows out. "Marcus," she finally managed, "you told me once that you built your empire because you thought power was the only way to keep your promise. But I want you to know something. You kept your promise the moment you looked at me in that alley and made me believe that someone cared whether I lived or died. Everything else, the money, the influence, the mansion, that's all extra. What matters is your heart. What matters is the boy who gave his jacket to a freezing girl and swore he would come back for her. That boy became the man I love more than anything in the world. And I promise you this: I will spend the rest of my life making sure you know how extraordinary you are." Not because of what you've built, but because of who you are. My protector, my partner, my home. They kissed. Everyone cheered. Somewhere in the distance, church bells. Bang! Leave a comment on this video with the words, "True love always finds its way." I want to see how many of you believe in the power of love to overcome anything. The first year of marriage was an adjustment. Elena had never lived with anyone as an adult, and Marcus had never lived with anyone, period. They stepped on each other's toes. They disagreed about stupid things like how to load the dishwasher and important things like how much risk was acceptable in Marcus's operations. They had their first real fight 3 months in about a decision Marcus had made without consulting her, and did not speak for 18 hours. But they also learned. They created rituals, morning coffee together before the chaos of the day began, Sunday dinners with no phones allowed, monthly date nights where they tried to remember the people they had been before responsibilities multiplied. They talked constantly, honestly, even when it was uncomfortable. They built a marriage the same way Marcus had, built his empire, deliberately, patiently, with attention to every detail. Eleanor got pregnant near the end of that first year. She found out on a Tuesday morning, after a week of fatigue and nausea, that she had attributed to stress. She took the test in the bathroom of their suite, stared at the positive result for a full 5 minutes, and then walked downstairs in a daze to find Marcus. He was in his study, as usual, buried in paperwork. He looked up when she entered, and his expression immediately shifted to concern. "What's wrong?" Elena held up the test. Marcus stared at it, stared at her, stared at the test again. "Is that—" he started. "I'm pregnant." Her voice cracked on the word. "We're going to have a baby." Marcus stood up slowly, like he was afraid sudden movement might break the moment. He crossed to her, took her face in his hands, and looked into her eyes with an expression she had never seen before. "A baby," he repeated. "Are you okay?" Eleanor asked, suddenly, worried. They had talked about children in abstract terms, but they had never made concrete plans. What if he was not ready? What if this changed things between them? Then Marcus smiled. It was the biggest, brightest smile she had ever seen on his face, transforming him completely, making him look young and hopeful and absolutely radiant. "Okay," he said. "I'm more than okay. Elena, I never thought I'd have this. A family. A real family. I thought that was for other people. Normal people. People who didn't grow up in alleys and build empires from nothing." He pulled her close, holding her like she was made of glass. "We're going to be parents, you and me. The kids who had nobody are going to raise a child who will never doubt for a single second that they are loved," Elena cried. Again, it was becoming a pattern. The pregnancy was not easy. Elena had morning sickness for the first trimester and back pain for the second. She had to cut back her hours at the hospital, which drove her crazy, and accept help from the staff Marcus employed, which drove her even crazier. She was not good at being taken care of. She had spent her whole life taking care of others. But Marcus was patient. He rubbed her feet when they swelled. He held her hair when she was sick. He read every parenting book he could find and asked so many questions at doctor's appointments that the obstetricians started sending him articles in advance. He transformed one of the mansion's spare rooms into a nursery that was ridiculous in its luxury, a crib that cost more than most cars, walls hand-painted with a forest scene, a rocking chair imported from Scandinavia, but also filled with personal touches that showed how much thought he had put into it. "Our child is going to be spoiled," Elena said when she saw the completed room. "Our child is going to be loved," Marcus corrected. "There's a difference." The baby came in early spring, exactly 1 year after their wedding. A girl, 7 pounds, 6 ounces, with her mother's eyes and her father's stubborn chin. They named her Hope because that was what she represented, the future, the reason everything had been worth it. Marcus cried when he held her for the first time, full, ugly tears that streamed down his face while he cradled this tiny human who was half him and half Elena, and entirely miraculous. "Hi, Hope," he whispered. "I'm your dad. I know I probably look scary right now, but I promise I'm not. I'm just—" I'm overwhelmed, because you're perfect, and because I've been waiting my whole life to meet you even though I didn't know it." Elena watched from the hospital bed, exhausted and aching and absolutely certain she had never been happier. "You're going to be a great father," she said. Marcus looked up at her with red-rimmed eyes. "You think so?" "I know so. Because you know what it's like to not have one. You'll never let her feel that way." He nodded slowly, then looked back down at Hope. "You hear that, little one? Your mum has high expectations. We better not let her down." Hope made a small noise that might have been agreement, or might have been gas. Either way, it was the most beautiful sound in the world. The next few years were a blur of diapers and sleepless nights and first words and first steps. Marcus scaled back his business operations, not entirely because the empire still required attention, but enough to be present. He was at every milestone, every doctor's appointment, every 3 a.m., feeding when Elena was too exhausted to function. He changed diapers with the same focus he brought to contract negotiations. He read bedtime stories with voices and accents that made Hope giggle uncontrollably. He was, Elena realized, the father he had never had. And he was brilliant at it. The foundation they had discussed became a reality. The Marcus and Elena Wright Foundation for Children focused on supporting homeless and at-risk youth throughout Chicago and eventually beyond. They funded shelters and schools and job training programs. They created mentorship initiatives that paired successful adults with kids who were growing up the way they had, invisible, forgotten, written off by society before they even had a chance. Elena took over the foundation's day-to-day operations once Hope was old enough for preschool. She had never imagined herself as an executive, but it turned out that the same skills that made her a good nurse, attention to detail, empathy, the ability to stay calm in a crisis, translated surprisingly well. Plus, she had Marcus's network and resources at her disposal, which did not hurt. They hired social workers and counselors and case managers. They opened 3 new shelters in underserved neighborhoods. They lobbied for policy changes and testified before city council and got into heated arguments with politicians who thought homeless children were somebody else's problem. It was exhausting. It was frustrating. It was the most meaningful work Elena had ever done. One evening, when Hope was 4, she climbed into Elena's lap while Eleanor was reviewing grant applications. "Mommy," Hope said, "what do you do at work?" Eleanor put down the papers and wrapped her arms around her daughter. "I help kids who don't have homes," she said. "Kids who need someone to take care of them." "Like Daddy took care of you?" Elena's breath caught. They had told Hope the story, an age-appropriate version anyway, but she was still surprised at how much her daughter understood. "Yes," she said, "exactly like Daddy took care of me." Hope nodded seriously, her small face thoughtful. "I want to help too." "You will, baby, when you're bigger." "Promise?" Elena kissed her forehead. "I promise." Years passed. Hope grew from a toddler to a child to a young woman who inherited her father's determination and her mother's compassion. She was fierce and kind and brilliant, with opinions about everything and the willingness to defend them. She drove her parents crazy sometimes. She made them prouder than they had ever imagined being. The foundation expanded. The business empire evolved, becoming more legitimate with each passing year as Marcus transitioned away from the shadier aspects of his operations. He never fully stepped out of that world. Some things once built could not simply be abandoned, but he found ways to minimize harm and maximize good. He was not a saint. He never would be. But he was better than he had been. And he kept getting better, because Eleanor expected it and Hope deserved it. They had a second child when Hope was 6, a boy this time, with his mother's gentle nature and his father's sharp mind. They named him Michael, after no one in particular, just a name they both liked, a fresh start with no baggage attached. He was quieter than his sister, more observant, the kind of kid who watched everything and said little but missed nothing. The 4 of them became a family in all the ways that mattered. Chaotic Sunday dinners and vacations that went wrong in memorable ways, and long conversations about politics and justice and what it meant to live a good life. Marcus taught both children to play chess. Eleanor taught them to cook. They both taught them to fight for what they believed in, to protect the vulnerable, to never forget where they came from. And sometimes, late at night, when the children were asleep and the house was quiet, Marcus and Elena would sit together on the balcony where he had proposed and look out at the city lights. "Did you ever imagine this?" Elena asked one night, her head on his shoulder, his arm around her waist. "What?" "This life, this family, this much happiness." Marcus was quiet for a moment. "No," he finally said. "When I was 12 years old, sleeping in alleys and stealing food to survive, I couldn't imagine anything beyond making it through the next day. But I knew one thing with absolute certainty." "What was that?" "That I would find you, again. That I would keep my promise." He pressed a kiss to her hair. "Everything else, and the business, the foundation, Hope and Michael, this house, our life, that all came from that, from the refusal to give up on the one thing that mattered." Eleanor smiled, her eyes on the distant lights. "You were a stubborn kid. I'm a stubborn adult. Some things don't change." They sat in comfortable silence for a while, two people who had traveled such a long road to reach this moment. "I love you," Eleanor said finally. "I know I say it all the time, and the words probably don't mean as much anymore, but—" "They mean everything," Marcus interrupted. "They always will. Every single time you say them, I hear that scared little girl in the alley telling me she's not afraid anymore. Every single time it reminds me why I fought so hard for so long." He turned to face her, cupping her cheek in his hand. "I love you too, Elena. I loved you when we had nothing, and I love you now that we have everything. I will love you until my last breath and beyond. That's not a promise, that's just the truth." She kissed him. Soft and slow, the kind of kiss that comes from deep familiarity and endless affection. "Take me to bed," she murmured against his lips. He laughed, that open, unguarded sound that still made her heart flutter after all these years. "Yes, ma'am." They walked inside together, hand in hand, leaving the city lights to shine without them. 25 years after a boy and a girl huddled behind a dumpster in a frozen alley, their story had come full circle. Not with an ending, because love stories don't really end, they just evolve, but with a moment of perfect peace. The boy who had promised to protect her had become the man who cherished her. The girl who had believed in him had become the woman who stood beside him. And together they had built something extraordinary. Not just an empire or a foundation or a family, but a legacy of love that would ripple outward for generations. If you've watched this far, it's because you liked this story. Leave a comment saying, "I've watched this far," so I can get to know you and see who really enjoys the stories here on the channel. Eleanor stood at the window of the mansion, watching the snow fall over the garden. She was 73 years old, and though the years had softened her body and silvered her hair, she was still beautiful, still strong, still the woman who had survived impossible circumstances and emerged. Not broken, but transformed. Behind her, she could hear the sounds of Christmas Eve chaos. Hope, now 43, was in the kitchen arguing with her husband about how to properly cook a turkey. Michael, 40, was trying to referee while his own wife laughed at all of them. Grandchildren raced through the halls, 5 of them now ranging from 3 to 16, their shouts and giggles filling the house with life. And Marcus, her Marcus, 75 and finally retired, though he still sat on. Several boards and terrified executives half his age, with his sharp mind and sharper expectations. He walked up behind her now, wrapping his arms around her waist, the way he had 1,000 times before. "What are you thinking about?" he asked. "That night," she said. "The alley. The cold." He rested his chin on her shoulder. "That was a long time ago." "I know, but sometimes I still can't believe how far we've come, how much we've built, how blessed we are." She turned in his arms to face him. "You kept your promise, Marcus. More than kept it. You gave me a life I never could have imagined." His eyes, those storm-grey eyes that had seen so much darkness and chosen light, were bright with emotion. "We gave each other that life," he said. "Partners, remember?" "Partners," she agreed. "Always." They kissed, gently, tenderly, The way people kiss when they have loved each other for over half a century and still feel lucky every single day. "Grandpa! Grandma!" A voice from the doorway. Their oldest grandchild, Emily, 16 and already showing signs of the family stubbornness. "Mom says dinner is ready, and if you don't come now, she's starting without you." Marcus laughed. "We're coming, sweetheart." Eleanor took his hand, and together they walked toward the dining room, toward their family, toward the loud and chaotic and wonderful life they had built from nothing but hope and determination and an unbreakable promise. The snow kept falling outside. Inside, there was warmth and light and love. Poor boy vowed, "Someday I'll protect you," to the street girl. Years later, he returned as boss, and they lived, not happily ever after, because life is messier than fairy tales, but fully, completely, together, always together. If this story touched your heart, don't forget to like this video and share it with someone who needs to hear it. Subscribe to the channel if you haven't already, and turn on notifications so you never miss another story. Thank you for being here. Thank you for watching until the end. And remember, sometimes the greatest love stories are the ones that take the longest to unfold.